Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Equity Guru again for today's 3-minute hit. I'm Chris Parry, and today we're going to talk about Tempus Resources, TEMPUS, or TMRR being the ticker symbol. Now, what is Tempus Resources? Glad you asked. It's an exploration company looking for gold in Ecuador, in a couple of places, but predominantly in BC, west of Clinton, northwest of the town that once was Lillooet. RIP. Tempus, bless it, is going out there and doing some drilling and looking at a historic mine, which means a mine that used to produce and hasn't produced for a little while. Now, if we're looking for specifics on that, well, you can go back through their information on their investor sheet, but here's the guts of it. Back before mining ceased in 1991, 330,000 tons of ore had been milled at this project at a grade of 21.9 grams per ton. Pretty good grade. Over the period from 86 to 1991, 231,000 ounces of gold and 564 ounces of silver went through this mill. Now, the reason I'm talking about the mill is because, to me, this is the differentiator on this project, right? Like, there's a bunch of places around that area where you're going to find gold. And when you find that gold, you're going to then send it to a mill where it's going to get processed and value added. And then someone's going to take that gold off your hands. To have the mill on site is interesting for a lot of different reasons. One, saves you a bunch of freight moving your ore from one place to the next. Two, allows you to keep an eye on what's happening to the processing because it's right there in front of you. And three, it allows you to get involved in other people's deals when they bring their ore through to get processed at your plant. Now, to be clear, this mill would have to be restarted, which is not necessarily an easy thing. Over time, these things degrade, and there's some modern ways of milling that probably weren't in play back in 1991. But regardless, this was an operating mill on an operating mine. So what these guys are doing now is going back to this production and to this project, and they're doing the work to expand the existing resource to make sure they know exactly where they should be drilling, what they should be drilling, and what they could expect if this thing moved forward to a production scenario. This is different from many other projects looking for gold in BC and indeed Canada and indeed anywhere, because majority of those projects are hopeful, right? They've sent a geologist out, they've gone out there and they've found a shiny rock, they've sent it off to get tested. The test came back okay, let's keep looking, let's take some pictures out of the helicopter, maybe we'll throw a drill hole down or two. There's a lot of those companies out there, right? They go and raise $500,000 a year, half of it goes to the CEO, the rest goes into 3 drill holes, and we keep the story moving by not diving too deep into it. The bigger boys go out there and do a chunk of drilling because they want to actually know what's in the ground. They want to know where they should be drilling more, where they should be zeroing in, and what exactly it would look like if they went to a production scenario. This is where Tempus is right now. $12 million market cap, which is fine. That's the valuation of the property if someone would come along and say, I'll take that off your hands. There's very little added to that market cap that is based on process, that is based on the work already done or the work being done. Now, as they do a bit more exploration and get those results back, you would expect that $12 million market cap to start to rise, even if they just get middling results. They're not just getting middling results, though. They're getting some decent results. They drilled 28 meters of 28.1 grams a ton just back in January. That's a pretty good result. Recently drilled a meter of 14.3 at Elizabeth just in the last week. That's a pretty small assay result, and no one's going to get too excited by it. But the previous one there, 28.5 meters of 28.1 grams a ton, that's a nice return. So if we look back, they've had a meter here of 23.5. They've got 2 meters of 86.99. That's filthy right there. So, if you go back through their news releases, you'll find some decent, couple of shitty, but some really good results. Now, to be clear, the exploration they're doing, it's not huge. They're not spending millions of dollars sticking drills all over the place. What they are doing is being very deliberate, put a drill hole here where we think there's going to be a good return, put one over here where we think there's going to be a good return, and if we miss, we miss. But if we hit, okay, let's do more around that space. So what they're doing is they're figuring out the zone on the cheap without just saying, let's raise 10 million and drill everything. They're using the resources they have at their disposal. They're not diluting the stock in a crazy way. They're being responsible, and they're getting at what they need to get at. Where does this all end up? Well, you've got enough visible gold there. You've got enough gold coming up through those drill cores that you know there's something here. The question becomes not, is there gold there, but how much gold is there, and how economic will it be to get at it? There are plenty of places with lots of gold, but it would take really a lot of money to get at it, so those places don't become successful. There's other options where you can get at the gold, but it might not be high grade. Those places are not successful. There is high grade gold poking its head out on this property, and these guys are starting to get very good at figuring out where to put those drill holes. Tempus, with a $12 million market cap right now and a 5-cent stock, is right at that place, that inflection point, where one or two good results can really move things. One or two shitty results are not going to get you much less than your existing market cap. You throw one or two holes down there and they kind of sputter, what are you going to do? Get less than $12 million valuation for this thing? You already know there's lots of holes there that did not sputter. So this is really just a case now of fine-tuning and getting to an interesting place. When you toss in the fact that there's a mill that wouldn't take very much, presumably, to get up and running, so that you could go out to Tech, you could go out to Barry, you could go out to Talisker, and you could say to all those guys, oh, by the way, anything you pull out of the ground, just shoot it over the fence. We'll mill it for you. That's interesting to me. That is a differentiator. That's where you go, well, not just, you're not just one of those companies that has a map on the back of your investor conference table. You're actually a company that has drill cores. You're a company that has a mill. You're a company that might be doing some deals. Even if your own property is only just so economic, if you can start pulling coin out of the neighboring property owners, then you make your production all the more interesting, right? You make the ability for you to make some money a lot higher than if you're relying just on what you can pull out of the rocks by yourself. I'm not going to tell you right now that this thing's going to $2, because that's not what I do. And that's not what the executives of this company have asked me to do. What they've asked me to do is to explain to you very clearly and concisely what they have. So, in summary, a nice little previously mined property with a potential mill sitting right on top, throwing up some pretty good results in small doses, small sample sizes, right? So if you get a bad sample, you wear it. If you get a good sample, everyone loves it. What they need to do now is to start accelerating. They start to need to do more drilling, more holes at once, and really show that there's some there. They will get to that. Now, there may be a need to raise some money at some point in the next few months. Don't know. I would imagine since they raised money last year, they raised a pretty good dose, but they have been doing work, that there's going to be a need for some soon. If that's the case, it might be a good opportunity for those of you who are accredited to get in there and get some warrants and really ride the upside. Myself, I like the activity that I'm seeing on the stock right now. It's not that it's going nuts, but it's that there's been some days where the volume has noticeably increased. In January, we went from 5 cents to 10 cents in 1 day. Sorry, 2 days. That's a pretty good jump in interest. 4.5 million shares traded over one of those days. So for me, a company that at the beginning of its life, it was back around 30 cents, the very early days when everyone loves everything. Now it's sort of settled in here on a really interesting 5 cents. If you can get this thing at 5 cents or less, I would recommend taking that very seriously, because there is a better than average chance that this thing is going to progress, not necessarily to production in a year or two, but to a place where you could see production coming. And that will be enough for a $12 million company to become worth, let's say, $18 million company, right? And that is a 50% jump on your money. It only takes a couple of buys for this thing to go from 5 cents to 10 cents in 2 days. That shows that there's some elasticity happening here. I wouldn't call it a trade at all. There are some days where there's nothing traded, but there's a growing amount of interest in this property. Now, the Ecuador properties, couldn't care less. Let them do what they want with those. For mine, when this thing gets interesting enough that someone bigger comes along, taps them on the shoulder and gives them a bunch of money for it, you put that money into the Ecuador properties and look for a parlay. But for now, if I'm investing in anything, it's the two things. One, interesting small sample size results that point to a big amount under the ground. Two, potential to get that mill up and running. If the mill gets up and running, there's a whole other business model inside this business model. And I like that a lot. And three, it's in BC. Literally, you and I grab some beers and some cigarettes, jump in the Jeep, we can be up to this place in 8 hours, and we can actually go and have boots on the ground, look at it for ourselves. That also means that when they've got this thing up and running, if it should get up and running, it's a short drive to the highway to be straight back to BC, to Vancouver. The guys that work this place can shoot into Clinton on an evening and get themselves nice and drunk. That's a good sign as well. So you're not out in the boonies to an area where you have to basically build roads from scratch. You're in a place where there's plenty of activity already, big companies dotted all around. That means you've got your infrastructure. It means it's cheaper to get things up and running. All signs point to good stuff here. Now, lastly, I'm going to say that a lot of times I like to bet on the jockey rather than the horse. And in this case, your president and CEO is Jason Bahnsen, Bahnsen. He's been at this for 30 years in natural resources financing and in operations. His career has gone from lots of roles in lots of resource industry, from being mining services all the way to mine management, investment banking, junior resource company development. There's a lot here, man. This is a real mining guy who's been at every level of everything that you would need to do to get this thing from a small patch to a big patch. And that's where the money's being made. Now, if you think gold is on a bit of a rut right now, trust your instincts. It's true. No one's really giving gold its due, but there will come a time, as there always does, gold goes in ups and downs, but it always averages on the up. And right now, gold isn't getting its due. That's fine if you're an explorer and not a producer. If you were pumping gold out, you'd be worried about the fact that gold prices are not jumping through the roof. But if you've got a 3 to 5 year timeline from where you are right now to the point where you might be producing, or 10 years really, if you're realistic, what's happening to gold prices now only matters as much as it means that you might not be able to access investment funds as much as you could if it was the flavor of the month. What you're really looking at is, will these guys progress this project over the next several years to a place where it gets really interesting? And for mine, the mill is the key here. If they can get that mill up and running and make it the hub for all the projects around that require mill services, that in itself is a reason to invest at the $12 million price tag. If they can move the project forward as a mine, well, then your potential upside is to add another digit to the end of that valuation, maybe more. But if it's just a mill that's handy to all of those places, that in itself is a good business at a $12 million market cap. I like it. I think Tempus Resources is something you should at least have on your watch list. Full disclosure, client of ours, so, we're conflicted up and down. But our reputation is, I think, pretty strong in that we don't represent dog shit. We don't represent pump and dumps. And the fact that we are harsh on the companies that we do business with sometimes means that the guys that aren't confident that they're going to do well move themselves out of the way. These guys came to us and said it's time to tell our story. Things are moving. And the more we dig in, the more we like what we see. So Tempus Resources, TMRR is the ticker symbol. Stick it on your watch list. Hey, maybe you don't want to invest in it right now. Maybe you want to watch it for a little while, see what they do. That's fine. That's what I'm doing with Tempus right now. I'm not buying in at 5 cents because maybe tomorrow it's 4. Maybe I'll miss out and it'll be 12 next week. But right now I'm betting that there's news coming and I'm going to have a few days to really get a sense of this thing before I make my move. But this, I'll tell you, client or no client, from what I've seen of this deal, I'm going to make my move. TMRR.